It's quite a compelling presentation by Catherine about the circular economy, and certainly, hopefully people are aware, Zero Waste Scotland is very much Scotland's circular economy and resource efficiency experts, so fully funded by the Scottish Government to help the Scottish wider economy transition to a more circular approach for all the reasons that Catherine has outlined. So I guess I'm going to touch upon some of the work that's already ongoing in Scotland to kind of bring that to life. But really, yeah, I'm going to build on that whole idea. You know, we need to talk about consumption, and certainly in the run-up to COP26, we feel it is a bit of an elephant in the room, a bit of a missing from the agenda. So clearly there is, you know, a whole host of discussions around decarbonising the energy grid, electric vehicle implementation of electric vehicles and public transport systems and renewables, etc. And absolutely, we need to do all that, you know, all about reducing our territorial emissions. But we do need to address consumption, because that is the other half of the issue when we want to reflect on the impacts on climate change. So if we are serious, and you know, Scotland's already made that pledge that we are serious about ending our contribution to climate change by 2045. So if we're going to do that, we're going to have to address all the issues around our consumption habits, both individually and in terms of the nation, in terms of our economy. So the evidence that we've produced, Zero Waste Scotland, sort of backs up what Catherine's already talked about. You know, that 4/5 of our wider carbon footprint here in Scotland comes from that consumption of materials and products, and basically the, you know, production, consumption of them, and ultimately that throwing away, that kind of linear economy approach. 4/5, and you know, half of that comes from materials and products that we import from other parts of the world, where you might argue that the environmental impact is much greater, particularly when we consider things like biodiversity loss. And the production of those products, possibly using, well, definitely using an electricity system which is not as green as our own, which is obviously now, thankfully, much more heavily engaged with renewables. Earlier this summer, we looked at that 4/5 and produced a report on the actual materials that are consumed in Scotland, and you know, if you tie that down to the amount of materials per person, it's about 18.4 tonnes per person per year that we consume in terms of materials. And experts reckon the most sustainable level is about 8 tonnes. So we're clearly, what we're consuming here in Scotland is clearly unsustainable. It's more than double the kind of safe level that the science would have us, the level that science would have us at. So that's why we are embracing the circular economy here in Scotland, for all the reasons to do with reducing the consumption, reducing the demand for new materials, not just here in Scotland, but around the world, making better use of what we already have in our economy. So it comes back to that whole repair, refurbishment, reuse of the stocks basically that we already have within our economy. How can we make more of that, almost in a very thrifty manner, very consistent with the Scottish thing. But we also think the circular economy clearly is going to reduce the demand, reduce the pollution, and the other environmental impacts I've already mentioned, biodiversity loss, plastics in the oceans, another clear impact of our linear system. But the other thing which, you know, the evidence points at for Scotland, there's a real economic driver here in terms of jobs and prosperity, and in a much more distributive way as well. The secret about the circular economy for me is it's not about dragging all the materials out of the whole of Scotland into the central belt and doing something clever with it. The circular economy is a much more regenerative, redistributive opportunity for Scotland, particularly when you think about jobs. And it's a kind of well-known fact that for every one job, we're very good at recycling. I mean, that's the other thing. Recycling is to some extent a success story for Scotland. But for every one job that there is in the collection of materials for recycling, there's another 8 jobs in the reprocessing, repurpose, remanufacture of those materials back into the economy. So whilst we have really, you know, grasped the recycling, you know, activity both at household level and within businesses, over 70% of the materials we collect for recycling are exported out of Scotland to other parts of the UK, further afield into Europe and beyond. So in some respects, we're exporting jobs, so we're exporting economic opportunities. So whilst that's very good for the environment, because it's obviously getting taken out of landfill, that economic potential in terms of jobs, good jobs, we are passing that up. And what's really happened in Scotland, so Scotland was one of the first countries, certainly in Europe, to have a circular economy strategy, launched that in 2016. And what's really happened since then, obviously, a whole range of programs and activities to support businesses, cities and regions, look at this in terms of individual strategies and supporting individual businesses shift their business model. We've obviously been involved in some of that. We've supported over 250 different businesses in Scotland over the last 4 or 5 years. We've invested £12 million in about 34 of those businesses. That has obviously created over 300 jobs. More importantly, it's that £12 million has created leverage of about £35 million of private investment as well. We've invested in skills. We've been working with public sector agencies on procurement to understand how they can actually, instead of buying products, can actually shift to leasing or renting products, and actually creating a market pool for some of those businesses that we've been working with. And what has shifted, I believe, in Scotland is, whereas the circular economy tended to start as an interesting thing to do with waste. What do we do with waste at the end of life? Is there something else we can do to repurpose that? What is now we're beginning to see a shift is we're seeing the circular economy as an input to our economy. So, we have huge ambition here in Scotland in terms of our net zero programme, in terms of increasing renewables, thinking about electric vehicles. What are we going to make that infrastructure from? Where's the raw materials going to come from? And what's the impact of that through the current system of, embedded carbon from, bringing those resources from all around the world? So we're beginning to shape our circular thinking about the materials that we already have. One of those is steel. So we have an opportunity where there's a lot of decommissioning that is going on in the North Sea in terms of infrastructure, certainly over the next 25, 35 years. The steel that is coming onshore is traditionally just cut up and shipped abroad, but we have an appetite for steel here in terms of the infrastructure that we need. So how can we make that supply and demand model work and create opportunities for reprocessing that steel here in Scotland using the third greenest electricity grid in terms of things like electric arc furnaces to reshape our supply chains and reduce the carbon intensity of the infrastructure that we need. Because what's really interesting for people, if you think about this is a global movement to achieve net zero. So 70% of the infrastructure that we all require globally for net zero has not been created yet, has not been built yet. So that's thinking about all the investment in renewables, all investment in electric charge points, EVs, all of that needs to be, so that's not been created yet. So where's those materials going to come from? So if we're going to seriously combat the climate crisis, we're going to have to think differently about how we resource those materials, where are they coming from, and how do we create that circular model that, again, Catherine has illustrated in her talk. So this is what's happening both at a national level, and as I've said, we're working with cities and regions around Scotland to identify opportunities at that level, create their own strategies, create their own opportunities around the supply of materials in their location. And even again, looking at the economic opportunities. So looking at particular city scans, so mapping out the resources in those locations, looking at the industries that are involved. For instance, at the northeast and the Tayside region, we've identified a £1 billion economic opportunity by shifting a lot of the supply chain from waste and resources back into the economy, realising some of those opportunities. These are massive benefits, both to the overall economy, but also to the social aspects, particularly if we're serious about the just transition, where we're moving people out of more linear systems into the circular systems. We're also obviously supporting individuals and communities to make some of the choices that, again, Catherine has pointed out, in terms of reusing, repairing, and it's quite startling that the car, car has actually only used 10% of its life. We also, on average, in Scotland, have a wardrobe full of about £4,000 worth of clothes, a third of which we haven't used for over a year. So there's real assets just hanging about in our wardrobes that we're not utilising, yet we go out and buy more and more of the stuff. I think we all know about electric drill. The average lifespan of an electric drill is 20 minutes. So, you know, what possible way that could we, you know, consume a lot smarter? So hence we support things like tool libraries and encourage people to be part of sharing platforms to ensure that, you know, not everybody needs an electric drill. You only need the electric drill for 20 minutes if it's light, if it's light. So if we all used it for 20 minutes, that would be great. So it is about ultimately system thinking. It's very difficult sometimes to be entirely circular on your own, and hence a lot of the work that we do is how do we build collaboration within and across supply chains and within sectors. And one of the examples of that, particularly, you know, people might have picked up, is with the work that we did with the Glasgow Chambers of Commerce, who organised and continue to organise a number of events in Glasgow, bringing different people from different sectors together. Was, you know, the making of beer from bread rolls from a well-known baker's chain in Glasgow. Now you might think, well, quite a lot of people are doing that, but for us, it grabbed a bit of attention to demonstrate to the public, particularly, what the circular economy was about. But what was really fascinating about that was that initiative came out from people who, from different businesses, a brewery, a bakery, coming together in a workshop and working together on a new idea. They would never have been in the same space before. Their industries didn't really, the businesses didn't really interact with each other. And what also happened was, you know, to make this work on a real-time basis, they needed a particular logistics solution to understand how many rolls were going to be available at the end of the day for the production cycle. So somebody who worked on apps in the digital space, they were two at the event, so they got involved. And actually then finally a pipe manufacturer got involved in actually, you know, helping the brewery design the infrastructure that was required, because there's something about the flow of bread when it's been going through the brewery process that needs different pipe thickness. So all of that came together as a collaborative project, and that is for everybody involved in the circular economy. For me, is the important focus. It's about collaboration. It's about bringing people together. We are, after all, very sociable animals, human beings. We like to interact. We like to be social. We like to work together. I think some of the work that we've done in the past in terms of resource efficiency has been working with sectors. That tends to be successful, but it also tends to be slightly guarded in the way that different industries within the same sector work together. But the circular economy, because it's cross-sector, the solutions are much more dynamic and fluid, particularly focused on place and resources working together, has shown that people are much more open to collaboration. So finally, just to finish, before we kind of move on, is just to mention food waste. I mean, in terms of consumption, it is, an area that, we all individually and collectively consume far too much. Food waste is now one of the biggest contributors to climate change. 8% of the global emissions come from food waste. Even here in Scotland, we waste about £1 billion worth of food. And 60% of that is in the home, and it's something that we all really need to think about, because the impact of that through the supply chain, both here in Scotland and globally, is significant. A third of the food that we produce is wasted. That equates to about a quarter of the water that's used in agriculture. So the systemic issues around the food supply chain is something that we really do need to think about, and we can all make that real contribution because of how we both buy our food, how we consume our food in terms of cooking, preparing for meals, how we store, and ultimately what we do with it at the end, whether it's we're wasting it or we're redistributing it or sharing it amongst friends or other sharing opportunities that we might have, particularly for businesses and the redistribution. So it's something that we really keen at Zero Waste Scotland to highlight, this idea that we really do need to talk about consumption. It needs to be on the agenda. We need to start thinking beyond our territorial emissions and really thinking about the global impact of us as a nation, as individuals, we can start to change by the way that we procure, asking the right questions. Where's our stuff coming from? What is the ultimate environmental and social impact of what we are consuming? And asking the people who are selling it to us to provide us with that transparency. For me, it's a bit like, well, the success of fair trade, for instance. Significantly, most of the big brand supermarkets only stock, fair trade coffee, fair trade chocolate. We need to do that with all our products. We need to understand where's it coming from, where's how's this tackling inequalities in the world, but ultimately how's this contributing to the fight against climate change.